Hello, everyone. It's me, Amber, the new showrunner and host of Table Top Babble. Very nice to meet you. I hope to bring the same passion and enthusiasm to the show and community as James did, though I do feel like he left some pretty big shoes to fill. I felt and still feel incredibly honored to continue the show for James and hope to do both you, the listener, and James proud. Thanks, James, for this opportunity and, well, everything. If you listened to the last episode, you'll have learned a bit about what I have planned for the show. I can't do this podcast alone, so I have two co-hosts helping me out. Most episodes will feature me as a main host, with Kenny or John doing some solo interviews. Another note, to those who are subscribed to the podcast, we just want to apologize for the inconvenience you may have experienced when we transitioned the feed over to Geekspective's hosting. We know seeing that all of a sudden there were 200 new episodes out and the subsequent auto-downloading was probably a pain, and we're very sorry about that. And now, with that all being said, let's get the show started. This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber. Today on the show, I talk with game designer Ajey Pandey, who I'm incredibly impressed with his ability to create and write just what seems like a ridiculous output to me. We sat down on October 7th and I learned all about his approach to game design, what inspires him, and we both got pretty excited about our future game design projects. Hi, Ajey. Thank you for coming on and being my guest for the first ever Tabletop Babble with me as a showrunner and host. So I know you from the Twitters and have done, the Twitters, and have done some layout and design work for you. But for our listeners, who are you and what do you do in RPGs?
Yes, my name is Ajey Pandey. I am the Bolt guy. I am the Lightning Mage. I am a game designer. I wrote a setting agnostic action adventure tabletop RPG called Bolt, which was kind of my first really big project. And it was the project that really got me onto the stage of TTRPG design as basically me trying to kind of do that like traditional action-adventure RPG, your Fate or your Zweihander or your D&D for that matter, and pull more explicitly from story game traditions like Powered by the Apocalypse games.
Sure.
Or like newer stuff like Wanderhome or Mnemonic. So,
gotcha. So I'm always interested in like people's journeys, like how did they get to where they're at now? And so one of the things I would like to talk about is like how did you get started playing TTRPGs? Is it something that you've been doing for a long time? Are you fairly new to actually playing, or what where did you start in actually like playing?
I started with the Adventure Zone.
Oh.
I think I started like around 2015-ish. I don't remember at this point. Time is a flat circle. But yeah, I started with D&D 5e. I started as the Game Master.
Oh, wow.
I started with like weirdly ambitious homebrew goals. Like my first ever D&D session in my life was early in college. And it was me running a game. It was me running a vehicle combat section. I led with, you're on a solar sailor. Go do some Mad Max nonsense.
Oh my gosh. That sounds so hardcore as like a first, like, one you're like, I'm gonna GM, and then also I'm already homebrewing a game. That's hilarious.
Like, very quickly, I was like, you know what? One of the Rangers wants to have a cool... something very close to the gun you can get in Hades.
Okay.
And I was like, I gave something very similar in terms of like a crossbow with a bunch of bells and whistles as like leveling options for one of the Rangers. That was one of the first things I did in terms of homebrewing. Pretty early on, I started messing around with initiative systems.
Oh boy. Were you not even really a player to start with? You just literally went right into GMing?
I started with GMing. And I have been the forever GM since.
I know people who are like that. My co-owner of Geekspective, Josh, my business partner, he's the same way. He's always been that GM first. Doesn't get to play in a lot of things. So I guess my next question for you then is, what types of TTRPGs do you like? Like, what are the ones that you're kind of drawn to?
I'm drawn to games with interesting mechanics. I like having a bunch of strings that I kind of have to like keep track of. Like Lancer, when I played it, was a ton of fun. Because you get to do wild nonsense of stacking things on top of each other. And the way the game's designed, you're encouraged to learn quickly and start stacking weird abilities of like, oh, this person has a drone that shoots anything that puts within range. Let's have someone else draw an enemy into range and do a wombo combo. That kind of nonsense is really fun. Playing spellcasters in D&D, like, once I did play a bard, and basically I built that character out to have a counter for just about everything. Because I am the dirty min-maxer, and I like games with a lot of, like, strings that I can pull to run absolute meme build stuff. So I think I was a bit late for 3.5.
Yeah. Oh man, I was like, so for me, I am not a very like mechanics first kind of person. I'm usually like story first and then make mechanics. So what is it like if you're trying to like, and this might be a hard question, and you could say pass if you want, like, Amber, I'm not going to answer that, but it's like, what is it about that kind of stacking and pulling strings and like mechanic stuff that like for you is rewarding?
For me,
you know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah. For me, it is the stories you can build purely out of the mechanics.
Gotcha.
Like the example I keep going back to is Knights of the Old Republic 2. You play as a Jedi, but you play as a Jedi in a computer RPG system that's very based on like D&D 3E, which means you get the D&D 3E power curve as a spellcaster. It's broken. And notably, people start treating you like that. They start calling you like a wound in the Force. There's a point where all of the Jedi that are still remaining are like, meet you all at once and say, you are a danger to everyone around you, everyone you speak to, and the entire galaxy. And then you say, screw you, and leave. Also, they all die. And then you prove them right. By like you like storm an entire Sith battleship and slaughter everybody. You storm like a city of Isis and you slaughter everybody and you single-handedly win the war. You storm a Sith Academy and slaughter everybody. And the mechanics of being an epic level D&D character reskinned for Star Wars fits with the story of you are overpowered by the rules of the Jedi, by the rules of physics of Star Wars, and everyone treats you accordingly. And that kind of, the mechanics telling the story is what really excites me. With Lancer, the character I played, he had a mech that basically the more heat he built up, the stronger he got. So he would literally just like roll up into the middle of the melee, you know, let people hit him. He doesn't care. He has HP for days. And then just start doing things that racked up his heat, because every time he got more heat, he shot a lightning bolt. Every time he got past a certain threshold, he shot more lightning bolts. And he became a fire and brimstone, like, preacher type. You know, screaming about the word of God, cleansing all, as a lightning storm brews around him.
Yeah, it's really... So that's really cool. Because, like, for me, you know, and maybe there are other listeners out there, maybe not, who, like, when we think mechanics-heavy games, we usually go, oh, God, there's going to be a lot of math, there's a lot of things to track. And that's, like, for me, who has ADHD and has focus problems, like, sometimes mechanics or heavy games or, like, mechanics-focused games tend to be daunting. But I think it's a really good idea to, like, think about it that way, where it's your mechanics can help you even more with your story, like push you into a character. So I think even things like Zweihander, you know, which is a very, I would say for me, a mechanics heavy game for me to even attempt. Like normally I personally wouldn't be drawn to that, but it's like a good idea to like, hey, this game helps you mechanically push your character into a certain narrative and it's fun to follow that. So it sounds like that's what you're into about mechanics. We talked a little bit about, you know, forever GM, all you did was GM to begin with, but immediately started homebrewing. What eventually pushed you to start getting out of homebrew and maybe start designing your own sort of system? So, what was that aha moment? I really want to make something of my own.
It was getting my hands on the Genesis system by Fantasy Flight Games. So I'd already been playing a bunch of the Star Wars game that they had written, and it is so fun. I remember first hearing about this game through the campaign podcast. The first gunfight that happened in that podcast, like first, Kat immediately led with, take cover, you are fragile, which is like a very new thing to hear from someone who's played a bunch of D&D, of, you will get two-shot in Star Wars FFG. And that really stuck out to me, as well as this, like, two-axis resolution system of, like, you succeed, you fail, but also you get advantages and threats that kind of go orthogonal to whatever you were planning. And it made for these very Star Wars fights of, you have your actual action of, like, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, but also, like, someone's blaster bolt goes wide and it hits a chandelier. Someone else like makes a lunge through a bunch of crates and one of them topples into a door and like jams it open. Like a bunch of side like spinning plates chaos happens. And the way Genesis is built is that it encourages that, and it makes a big ritual out of figuring out what the nonsense is. And it's very fun. And once they divorced the core dice system from Star Wars, it became this toolbox of, because they made it in Star Wars, you can do sci-fi, you can do fantasy, because it's Star Wars. Anything goes. Which means that if you build a system that takes out the Star Wars and just has a core resolution system that's very, very good, all of a sudden you just have this sort of thing of like, I could make a fantasy game out of this. I could make a cyberpunk game out of this. I could make, like, a Monster of the Week, like, X-Files type game out of this. I could make a steampunk game out of this. And what I ended up doing was I got into Genesis hacking. I made this, like, maritime, steampunk, Bloodborne looking, secretly about the military-industrial complex setting. Which you actually did the layout for.
Yes, I did. I'm nodding like, yes, I know that. I've read a lot of that.
And, like, that was my first foray into role-playing game design. Of, like, here's this general-purpose system. What are the things that I can do to add to this, to tweak this, to, like, reframe some of the mechanics? Like, one of the big things that I did with New Braemar was, in the general Genesis system, there's this concept of minions, of, like, you can just move, like, 3 or 4 goons as one group in the initiative order and save everyone a bunch of time, which is great if you're used to playing a game with a bunch of kobolds coming at you, and it's like, okay, how does the game master keep track of this? Like, Genesis had a really good answer. But one thing I hit home with New Braemar was, well, one, every character needed to have a reason to kill someone. Like, it was not like a thing you could just kill for free. And two, it took out the whole concept of minions for people. And that automatically changes, that has ripple effects to the rest of the game. Of all of a sudden, like, every encounter is person versus person, for the most part. In every fight, if people die, it becomes serious. And that was purely because I changed the mechanics. Not because I really said, like, I didn't say, like, killing is a big deal, people will remember. I, one, took out the easy way to get a bunch of people dead, and two, I put in penalties. One of the reasons to kill was revenge, and it was, you don't lose any strain for killing anyone on your path to revenge. Once you exact that, regain all of your strain, whatever you'd lost, and reconsider why you would kill someone.
No, it's like, it's interesting because I think of things, for me, like, I haven't designed anything. I've thought about it, but it's always been a little bit too daunting for myself. And even just, like, talking and listening, it seems kind of overwhelming for me, personally. Others maybe not. But, so my question for you is, like, how many attempts, like, you've talked about, like, GMing, begin with homebrewing, sitting down to actually start doing Gods of New Braemar, the attempts, is like, was it literally like your first time sitting down, I'm going to do this and it's going to be Gods of New Braemar, or was there like Gods of New Braemar, like something different that we'll never know about or see?
For the most part, my writing style is very much, I like ride the tsunami of hyperfocus into a first draft.
Oh my god, I wish I could do that. Jeez.
And then I never edit it.
Oh my god.
Like with New Braemar,
yeah.
like I literally started with the weapons list. I started with like the backgrounds, the careers, and the weapons list, because that's all you really need to make a Genesis setting. And then from there, I added in, a bunch of the extra character creation stuff. So like, like the Glory Doom system of like, you get these extra, basically Fallout perks is what they were. There was also like the reason to kill stuff. There were some new magic actions. And that was pretty much it. Like a lot of the actual lore writing, I just kind of hand waved.
Right.
Because I'm not really a lore person very much. Like I like setting up these broad like geopolitical powder kegs, but I don't really have the time or patience to research actual cultural details, so I don't.
Right. That's so interesting because it's I'm fairly new to the TTRPG scene as far as like community online stuff, and it's always interesting to see the different, like how people approach and what their strengths are in game design. Because like I know a lot of people who are like really into that lore stuff, and then there's of course me. I love writing character vignettes and stories and NPCs and all that stuff. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, God, I wish I could have hyperfocus.
I never research anything though. I do not research history.
So that's your dump stat, right?
That's
research?
my dump stat. The patience to research and read books.
Right.
I do not have the attention span for books.
Gotcha. So, okay. So then focusing on just you, walk me through how your process of designing like a game, like specifically, how about this? Let's talk about Bolt first.
Yeah.
And then maybe you can walk us through how you approach designing Bolt. So tell me about Bolt.
Bolt started as a spite project because Genesis Foundry is miserable. It's a DM's Guild knockoff with all the problems that come from being a DM's Guild knockoff. Like, if I wanted to, like part of the reason I didn't, like, expand New Braemar was it wasn't clear whether I would own it entirely. So I was like, screw you. I will literally Pathfinder Genesis. Like, literally it was that bad TTRPG's, like, tweet of, like, once, like, the team behind Genesis got sacked for the second time, I think. Like, that Twitter account later was like, catch me making the Pathfinder equivalent of Genesis. And I was like, wait, that's me! So, with Bolt, I literally started with, like, a manifesto. Like, before I even wrote much of the mechanics, I started with a manifesto of what I wanted the game to do. Because I keep going back to that mechanics of the story. For some reason, I keep getting drawn to role-playing games about violence and doing violence. I know a lot of people don't like games about violence, but I can't not write games about violence.
Everybody has their own thing, so.
And I literally went about it with the thing that frustrated me about Genesis, which is both its greatest strength and greatest weakness, is that rolling dice takes forever. It becomes its own big ritual, and I was like, what if that was fast? I went with what if it was fast, and what if the probabilities were clear? Because when you roll, like, you can't really, with Genesis, you can't really tell, is it better to have 4 greens or, like, 2 greens and a yellow? There's not a clear answer to that.
Sure. So, because I'm not very familiar with Genesis, the dice, it's a dice pool system,
the dice
right?
pool system, yeah.
Okay, yeah. You get to have, like, different, there's specific dice with faces. And,
yeah, like,
okay.
They're all weird cuneiform things, and it takes a while to get used to like reading the bones, as it were.
Yeah, gotcha.
So I literally started with rolling dice because I didn't really have a sense of what I wanted the game to be beyond kind of like Genesis, but my own. So I started with the dice system of like, I want clear probabilities, so I want the D10. +1 is +10%. And then, because I like that advantage threat system, but I wanted it to be faster, I just made it a D4 that works independent of whether you succeed or fail. So you still have that 2-axis thing, except it's much simpler, just up, down, perk complication, as opposed to degrees of success, failure, etc. for Genesis. And that was where I started. And then from there, I was like, okay, this seems like Genesis, but fast. let's roll with that idea of let's do all the same verbs that Genesis has of being flexible with encouraging escalating chaos, having players juggle a lot of plates. Like, you're managing your wounds, you're managing your strain, you're managing your critical injuries, you don't care about inventory in the slightest, and you're managing chaos in the form of advantages and threats, invoking new things about the situation and invoking new advantages and disadvantages. So I basically went at that same route and just said, I'm going to make everything faster. And I made it that same kind of like broad skill list you would expect from, say, Cyberpunk 2020, which was the other big influence for Bolt. Like, the core resolution is Genesis, and the combat system is, I read the first page of Friday Night Firefight, which, can I just grab the book and like read a bit of it?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Cyberpunk 2020. Holy heck, it's problematic in so many ways.
Yeah.
And I would never actually want to play it. Or maybe I'd want to play it a little bit. But the approach it has to first skills, because you can get good at, like, botany and chemistry. Those are real skills.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Which is amazing. But also, Friday Night Firefight is not good, clean fun. They pulled stuff from, like, FBI statistics. 80% of most gunfights occur between untrained amateurs at a range of 21 feet. Most of these battles happen within 8 feet or less, are in dark and difficult to see conditions. Everyone's out of breath. No one's aiming. And if you do get shot, that's usually game over.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, like, have that sort of thing of, like, everything's short range. Everything wrecks you. Every scrub is scary. And I wanted it to be crunchy. And by crunchy, I didn't want it to be a lot of math. I wanted it to be crunchy in terms of you have a lot of options that you have to consider every time. So it's,
and then the management as well, right? Like, you're like, because you said at the beginning, is there a lot of like tracking certain things and like tweaking things, and this affects this? Because that seems like something that you're interested in at like what you've told me at the beginning.
The core pieces are simple, which makes it really
cool.
fun. So, for example, the way initiative works in Bolt is you don't roll, you pick a number of actions at the beginning of every round. So, like, if we were both playing characters and we had a bunch of NPCs, like, you could pick 1 to 3 actions. Let's say you pick 2, and I pick 3, and then the goons in front of us pick 2. That would mean you would go first, because you pick 2 actions, then the goons, then I would. And each action could be like, you know, you flip a table, you move within a zone, you duck to cover, you push a big red button, you draw a gun, yada yada yada. Or you do something you do something where you roll a die. So in that, all of the sudden, the number of actions you have becomes a resource that you balance against acting first, and your die roll becomes a resource. What do you want to spend that die roll on besides stuff that doesn't require an action? Like, some abilities don't require action, or don't require a die roll, you just do them. And that changes the action economy. And then you're managing your health, you're managing your wounds, which, as they stack, like, you get a permanent disadvantage to every roll, but only your rolls. And then you have your tenacity, where you can literally just spend your tenacity to 1-to-1 increase your roll. And all of a sudden, it doesn't feel like you're tracking a bunch of things. It doesn't feel like you have a bunch of resources, but you do. Which means that, one, when you're playing this game, it becomes very tense of, like, you want to try and get the drop on someone because, you know, if you have, I don't know, like 8 to 13 health is common, unless you're really, like, trying to, like, spam health. Meanwhile, swords do 6 to 7 damage. An assault rifle will do 9 damage. And if you get a success and a perk, you do damage and a half. So things wreck you. Yeah.
Cool. Again, I'm like processing and putting things in my mind so I can like make the connections. I think that's cool. Yeah, it's a very simple system, but that just the options and choices makes that tense, that drama as you're like playing it. Yeah,
and that's the crunch that I think is done properly. Like, Lancer does this very well too. Of the actual number crunching happening in Lancer, not very much. You're not adding very much to these rolls. You know, like, the numbers for health and heat aren't very large. You rarely go above 12 in terms of just numbers you're tracking. The options you have are all laid out in front of you if you have the character sheet, like, on the online tool. The difficult stuff comes from looking at your options, looking at the map, and like making a decision at that point. More than it is doing a bunch of math. Because the options are clear, the trade-offs are clear. There are just options that you have to make constantly. There's no one right answer.
This episode is brought to you by Kobold Press and Tome of Beasts 2, now available on the Kobold Press store. The publisher of the original smash hit Tome of Beasts, Kobold Press, wrangled a new horde of wildly original, often lethal, and highly entertaining 5e compatible monsters to challenge new players and veterans alike. The Tome of Beasts 2 will bring 400 new monsters to 5th edition, from angelic enforcers, Sasquatch and Shriekbats, to psychic vampires, zombie dragons, and so much more. In addition to the Tome of Beasts 2 hardcover volume and PDFs, you can get monster pawns, VTT versions, and monster layers with beautiful maps. It also includes the work of Don't Split the Podcast Network's Celeste Conowitch and James Introcaso. Find out more on koboldpress.com. I like. Well, it's just like, I talk about how I don't like doing math, but like for me, one of the things I do enjoy in games is the whole management resource situation and then getting options to choose. I think that's a really fun thing to do because it does make you make hard choices and decisions, and which can make for really good storytelling and role playing. I don't want to have to always succeed. I like the hard bargaining. Failure's fun. So,
and the part that really like. And this is why Wander Home excites me so much.
Oh
like,
yeah, I backed that.
Like it seems like the opposite of like that like crunchy game, but it hits the same. It's still resource management. It's pared down to one resource that you're expected to like pass forward and backwards constantly. Just that alone makes the mechanics tell your story. You know, if you play, let's pull up the play kit because why not?
Sure.
Because I have Wonder Home here somewhere. I have the play kit, rather. Where did it go? There it is. The Poet. This is, like, masterful game design, in my opinion, because all of your options, it's like Lancer, all of your options for things that would occur to your character are right there. If you were the Poet, you can always self-deprecate. You can always ask what used to be here. You can always write something down. And the things you get a token for, the things you were encouraged to do, because the tokens help you do things, the things you were encouraged to do is like, give someone something you'll hold dear, speak your true feelings on a subject, take a moment to watch a tiny moment of beauty and describe it to the table, take a moment to marvel at something no one has ever seen before, and ask someone else to describe it. Like, those are the things that give you the resource you want, right. And stuff that would encourage you to act and think like a poet. And then you get to spend those tokens on stuff like ease someone's pain, if only for a moment, reveal something hidden about the person in front of you and ask them what it is, or tell something important about the place you're in. Like, there's this economy of things you want and things you will do to get the resource that will help you do with the thing you want. But the options, both for things you can always do, things that get you a token, things that you can spend the token on, are all thematically relevant. So even though the mechanics are simple, they're still telling the story.
It's so funny you bring up Wander Home because it's so the opposite of like tone-wise of your game.
Okay.
But like, yeah, go ahead.
One of the ideas I had, because I was like, this belonging outside belonging framework, like a lot of the games built around it are about like, you know, like Jade Dragon's also made a horror game, like a very queer horror game around it. The original versions were about being marginalized in some way. And I immediately went with, like, this is an incredible engine for doing action scenes. Because the ebb and flow of an action scene, of taking a punch and then giving the punch, of pushing forward and falling back, that's the token system. So I literally built, like, I was watching a playthrough of this game called Motorstorm Apocalypse, where basically you play a bunch of like ATVs and racing trucks and yada yada yada, but you are in a quasi California city. It's secretly San Francisco, as it's getting apocalypse-eyed. So like earthquakes and hurricanes, And like this was before like climate grief became a phrase people used. But I kept thinking about it in terms of this is happening already. What if we made a racing game about climate grief? But that's still like an action racing game, and I built it out of this engine because you can have like spend the token to gain a place, gain a token to lose a place, gain a token to get bogged down, spend the token to push past an obstacle in some thematically relevant way.
Let me ask you this. If I had no idea what Bolt was, and you were trying to tell somebody, like, in like a couple sentences what it's all about, could you give me like a 2-sentence, oh, I saw this Bolt RPG. I don't know. I don't know what this NPC is, but I need to know about this here game.
It is John Wick, the role-playing game.
I was thinking of John Wick literally like 2 questions ago. You're like, I have a violent video game with the close quarter FBI statistics. I was like, this sounds like John Wick. Okay, great.
This
you
is
sold
John
me.
Wick / Hotline Miami, the RPG.
Here are my dollar bills. Great, I love it. Like, that's awesome. Because, like, so it's literally an engine, or is there, like, actual setting stuff in there now? And
that's
classes? Is that part of Bolt as well?
So the way Bolt's kind of built out, it is very much built like Genesis or Fate in terms of, like, it gives you these core rules. Okay. And then Fate does this especially. It comments its own code. So it's like, here are some example roles that are attached to an example setting that I'm going to write. Like, there's a fantasy setting and a modern setting that I am going to write, at least to give a basic framework of, because no game is truly generic. Even the skill list I give and the magic system I like provide are setting specific, so I have to add some kind of setting. But those are very much like side things. It's like, here's some example roles for this setting, and then here's how you write your own. With the idea being like, okay, everyone else can write their own setting, and people have. You know, people have made like an exosuit game. Someone made like a space trucker, like Pete Seeger in space type kind of game. Someone made Mad Max. I've made like a knockoff Star Wars emulation of like Netflix Daredevil superhero like street level stuff. Yeah. Like, I think the real magic of Bolt is that at this point, a bunch of people have already added their own spin and they're taking it in their own directions. So more and more, it matters less that I haven't released an official version of like any sort of setting.
Random question, but not because it's related to everything we're talking about. How important do you think setting is to games in general?
Vital.
Vital.
Absolutely essential. Important. Like every game like has assumptions about what kind of person you are. Mm-hmm. You know, like if you are playing Lancer, the assumption is you are the best of the best in terms of like mech pilots, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing. Like, there's that assumption attached to it. And then there are like further assumptions of, yes, your body can be like rebuilt, you can be flash cloned. Like, that's part of the mechanic, but also says something about the world you're in, and also says something about your character that you would be worth doing this arguably unethical process. Like with Wanderhome, there are assumptions made in the mechanics, and those assumptions bleed into your character, they bleed into the setting of none of the characters have any options for violence unless you like hack in the game. All of the characters, there's implication of trauma. Like, it's a very like pastoral game, like that's the pitch. Like, one of the core playbooks is you are a child wandering the roads. Like, that's the ragamuffin. And like, on one hand, like, you get to play the embodiment of whimsy. On the other hand, there's some serious tragedy attached to your presence in this story. And then it's like, you get to like the intro and it's like, oh, this land had a war, but no longer. And that explains everything about the Ragamuffin story. That explains a lot about the Ragamuffin's like tragic backstory that it mechanically assumes. It says a lot about the vagabond. Implies something about the dance that the dancer will never dance again. You know, like, there's tragedy built into the mechanics that makes implications about the setting and the character. You know, like, Bolt is fundamentally a game about killing people. there are some very detailed rules for killing people. And it implies something about the world that there is a space for 3 to 5 people who are very good at killing to do a lot of killing. You know, like, you can't have Bolt happen in the world of Wanderhome. It would corrupt the implications of the place.
Agreed. I also just now had a flash of the Old Guard Bolt RPG. Have you seen the Old Guard?
I have not seen the Old Guard.
Okay, you should watch the Old Guard. You said 3 to 5 people who are really good at killing, and I was like, oh, check out the Old Guard. Anyway, so let me was me refreshing my mind here as I take in all this stuff. Bolt has been kickstarted successfully.
Yeah, I'm hyped.
Which, congratulations, that's awesome.
You're on that project.
Yes, I am. So congratulations to me too, I guess. I don't know. I have yet to do my work. But through this whole process, starting from your GMing to homebrewing to hacking to all of your stuff through Kickstarter, if you have any advice to any aspiring game designers.
Let's see. Let's start from GMing. I think for GMing, my advice would be let your players surprise you. Let them break your game, because that's the power fantasy too of, oh, like, you have this big scary monster, you've just activated my trap card, bam. And that's the power fantasy too, and I don't know, let people do that. That's on the game master side. And also, like, safety tools are important, and
yes,
tailor the game to your players, because they're also there for, it's not just a power fantasy. So that's on game mastering. On actually writing a game, I think clarity of vision is important. If you have a very strong idea of, like, who you are or who your characters are and what they're doing and why they're doing it, that will clarify so much more about the rest of your game. I started Bolt with, your characters are dangerous people who like danger, and that informs the rest of the game. Like, I go to that, like, you're 3 to 5 people who are good at killing, and that makes implications about, okay, for this fantasy setting, you are in a part of the world that nominally does not have war, because the capital of this, like, global empire is that way. So there's no war in Niran Valley. So instead you are these, like, spec ops teams doing a shadow war. Which is why you have a bunch of groups of 3 to 5, like, mercenaries going around doing a bunch of killing. And that makes implications about the game and the setting and what kind of things you're good at. So, like, having that clarity of vision, I think one of the ways of going about it is, like, making these, like, strict limitations. Like, one of the things that I made a hang up about was 1 die roll per turn. And I made that a thing I just made a hang up about. Or every magic tree should require you to have other skills. Like, the life magic tree needs you to get good at endure and will not replace the medicine skill. Or the combat magic tree very much would like you to have a regular combat skill too. Like, that kind of thing. And that became another hang-up that I just hung on to, because that adds clarity of vision to the game. In terms of kickstarting, plan early, plan constantly, write your budget before put on Kickstarter. Like, figure out how much things cost, and then make that your budget. And seriously consider non-Kickstarter models, because Kickstarters are very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
They're very risky. Really, unless you're going for a giant scope of project for Bolt, like, it's like 100-something page game. Like, the base funding budget was $12,000. There's no way I was going to get that any other way. But if you're making, like, a 30-page game, try experimenting with itch sales, with commissions, with, like, Patreon funded targets. And if you want ideas, like, people can always DM me. My DMs are always open. Yeah. But be willing to experiment, but always have the clarity of vision of, like, why you're doing this, for what reason, and for whom. I didn't market Bolt to people who were new to role-playing games. I marketed Bolt to game designers. And once I was, like, needle sharp on this is for game designers, that solved a lot of problems about, like, how do I phrase this? How do I talk about this?
That is incredibly smart That's really good advice. One of the things I see in my professional life is usually like either scope creep or like they forget what they're doing. They want to do everything for everyone. And it's like, you can't do that. Like, you're not going to make everybody happy. So who is this for? Who is that demographic? And really tailor it to them. So that's real. I'm so happy you brought that up because I see it in my professional life all the time.
Like as an example of I can't be everything to everyone, like let's compare Bolt to Fate. Because Fate also does action adventure, flexible gameplay, tuned to play quickly. Like Fate is a fast game in the same way that Bolt is a fast game. Both of these games go about things differently. Fate, one, the die system is very bell curve based, which is just a personal like preference thing. And two, Fate strips out skills, strips out stats, and it bets everything on fate points, on you making these invocations up or down, and having those define your rules. Bolt instead went for a more complicated role system and a more complicated initiative system to do the same thing. And the resource becomes, instead of fate points, it becomes spending tenacity to fudge your rolls. But fundamentally, Fate wanted to go for fast, flexible, cinematic, whereas Bolt went for fast, flexible, mechanical tension. Like a fight in Fate won't make you scared in the same way that a fight in Bolt will. But also, if you wanted to pull utter nonsense, Fate will let you do that much more than Bolt will. Different priorities make different games. Yeah, like I didn't try to make a game that people who like Fate would want. I didn't make a game that people who want thirsty sword lesbians would want. Mm-hmm. You know, I made a game that I wanted, and I trusted that people would want that too.
You know, I always say, if you're having fun and enjoying stuff, there's gonna be other people who are like, hey, that person's having fun and enjoying stuff. I also want that fun and enjoyment. So, there you go. Be true to you. Don't people please. That's my advice.
Yeah, don't people please. They'll come. If you've made something that you're proud of, odds are it's going to be amazing.
Yep.
And even if you're not proud of it, it's probably still pretty great.
Yeah, because the voices in the heads.
You see all the flaws. Most people don't.
Yeah. Okay, I had one question pop up randomly while you were talking and things, and I'm like holding myself back. How did you land on the name Bolt? Is it just literally because it's a lightning bolt fast, or is there a story behind Bolt?
Originally, I wanted to call the game Dagger, with the idea of like this is setting agnostic. A dagger will show up in any setting. This is the game for any setting. And it turns out that the Dagger RPG system is already a thing. It's apparently made for kids. So I don't know why I got to Bolt. It was fun to say. It was very fun to say all caps. So I just went with Bolt and made it all caps for, I don't know why. I don't have an acronym for it.
You don't need an acronym.
And like that's where the whole like the whole phrase lightning fast RPG came after.
It works. It's great.
It works. I stuck with it.
It sounds good. I know it. Bolt. Okay, so Ajey, what is your game design future? You've got Bolt going. I know it's still ongoing. You still got things to do.
I have an idea that's kind of on the back burner, which is to take the belonging outside belonging framework. And this started as a meme idea, like a troll idea of like, what if we took this game architecture used currently to make these games about marginalization and community building, you know, like Dream Apart and Dream Escape were these very, very like introspective, community focused games. What if I took this architecture to make a tactical game about violence?
You do you. You do you.
And I was like, okay, how do we take no dice, no bastards and make it crunchy and tactical? And the idea I came up with was, what if, instead of having a GM or dice control your enemies, have a scripting language control them?
Ooh,
so something like, and I guess I'll pull this up too, because I am extremely excited about this. This is what got me started on Ulysses as like a writing app. It's so nice.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, have a sniper enemy that, like, the script is like, first off, if more than half of allies are down and you have the ammo, fire your 4-target missile at the 4 closest enemies. Else, if an enemy is in melee range, run away. Else, if an enemy is in line of sight, within 5 or less hexes, fire a sniper rifle at closest enemy. Else, look for an enemy.
Oh, boy.
So, basically, you're writing a GM-less game. You write all these enemies. And they work like AI.
That's really cool.
And the crunch comes from exploiting that. And the lore reason for that is that... Oh, and also the initiative system is Troika. It's like the fishbowl initiative from Troika, where depending on how the names draw out, you may just not get a turn this round. Because you're in the aftermath of a planet-destroying war. All of the mechs are just these like hacked-together hunks of junk. No one's properly trained. Which is why this sniper only has 4 things they can do, and they have nothing to respond to getting knocked over or set on fire. They aren't trained enough to like know what to do about it. And on the same end, you might not have an option for putting out fires or for getting up, because either that piece of tech is missing from your mech, because who knows, or maybe you're like. Militia just couldn't afford fire extinguishers for everyone, so you're just not having one. Or maybe you took out that mount for a fire extinguisher in exchange for a different gun. You know, you have your things you can just do. You have your things that require, just positioning and movement and smart planning. There are some things that require a token, so it's like your special weapons. And the things that you gain a token for are specific to your chassis. So if you are the Beetle, you are the tank, you gain tokens by getting in the way of people, by overheating your mech, by forcing someone to attack you. If you are the long-range Mantis, you get tokens by not moving, or for committing to attack to a particular enemy, regardless of whether they go out of range or whatever. If you're the Cricket and you recon, all the mech chassis are bugs. If you're a Mosquito, you're the hacking, you get tokens by getting behind cover, leaving an enemy range, or moving a bunch. And then, like, the hacking abilities are literally you move, like, the order of commands, or you force the thing to be true of like automatically you can hack this sniper to immediately force enemy is in melee range regardless of whether that's true, and then immediately have him run away.
I'm sure no one else can see this, but I'm like just like really digging
and like
this idea, and this is really cool.
It's like everything Bolt is not, because Bolt is flexible, pretty simple. It is designed to be hacked. It can like move in a bunch of settings, and it's a very traditional game. Like for all of its like I guess innovations in terms of like the way it handles initiative, it's a very traditional game that like can be ported from D&D. Meanwhile, Rust and Wire, very much setting specific, context specific, weird.
Yeah, it's like the complete opposite. I was just like, literally, my mind is just like, this is a level of nerdy that like I'm into, where it's like, okay, as a GM, I'm gonna start like making trees basically.
You're gonna learn object-oriented programming by playing a mech game,
which is great, which is awesome, and it would trick me. It would trick me to do and learn that, because I would be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna set up the if, and when, or else this kind of stuff, because I'm excited.
And it's like if you go and get a bunch of like hacking abilities, all of a sudden you get stuff like you literally end up hacking code you've written.
Yeah.
Which means that as you learn the system, you get better at writing these like scripts, which means that as you continue through the campaign, the enemies get better trained.
That's awesome. And I'm going to share with you a brainworm that I've had, which is a magic system that is much like this, but using drawing. I've wanted to make and this is, I don't talk about my stuff online. Like, this is just me and my little like notebook world, where I really want to make a RPG that is, it's all magic based. You have to be a magic spellcaster. Again, that hyper focus, clarity of mind, right? Hyper focus. This is what I want. indulge me, world. And it is like basically drawing, but scripting like this, but different. Like instead of writing out words and scripts, it would literally be you have to draw runes and things like that. So this literally
that's like Arx Fatalis right there, of like literally drawing out runes.
So like this what you're talking about, your design future stuff is like right aligned with like the kind of design stuff I'm interested in right now. And if I ever can sit down and do anything, I would do it. So I'm looking forward to that.
Beyond that just making more
awesome.
bolt hacks, fleshing out the ones I have, getting into consulting for game design. Like at this point, I'm no longer the Bolt game designer. I am now the Bolt project manager and brand manager and community manager.
Yeah, sure. There's always that like you hit a level and you're like, oh, my baby is free and now I'm doing other things.
Yeah,
so,
and I'm
gotcha.
months out from properly fleshing out Rust in a while. I literally have a code compendium because I have to write a scripting language from scratch. I have to define what a barrier is. I have to define what the down tag is. I have to define the in IFF tag. I have to define organic or is damaged. Because if you want to have an EMP weapon, you have to have an if organic tag.
This sounds so cool. I'm so excited for this. Oh my gosh. Okay. We could probably talk a lot about stuff, but I'm going to stop us now and just say thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
This was an amazing discussion. So for the listeners, let's let them know where they can find you and anything that you've got going on.
So you can follow me on Twitter at Ajey Pandey, just my name, where I will probably get back to reviewing games under the Ajey Reads hashtag and get back to writing game design threads under the hashtag Tabletop Chop Shop, which everyone can tweet with. Please do. I want your game design, not really hot takes, but game design like nuanced hype threads. Like I really want, because that's super cool to hear people like think about how they're designing their game. You can also follow Bolt at BoltRPG. And by the time this episode comes out, I will have a full Ko-Fi store running where you can pull me in to write you a role in Bolt, or like write you a new weapon or specialization for your own home game or home like thing you're working on in Bolt, or commission me for some time to like help you with game design. And that is all on ko-fi.com/Ajey Pandey as Lightning Mage game design comes online.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at Rocket Orca, Kenny as at Volfmir, and John is at Crossways GM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards.